My name is Daniel, and before this journey began, I was just an ordinary person who dreamed about seeing the world beyond my small hometown. Every morning, I watched videos about traveling, airports, foreign cities, and people speaking English naturally with confidence. I always admired travelers who could walk through busy streets, ask for directions without fear, order food in another language, and smile comfortably during conversations with strangers. I wanted to become one of those people, but every time I imagined myself speaking English in real situations, my confidence disappeared. I worried about making mistakes. I worried about pronunciation. I worried that people would not understand me. Still, deep inside my heart, I knew that learning English was the key that could open many doors for me. One day, after months of hesitation, I finally decided to book my first international trip. The moment I bought the ticket, excitement and fear mixed together inside me like two storms colliding in the same sky. I realized that this journey would not only teach me how to travel, but also teach me how to communicate, survive, and grow through English. The first thing I did was stand in front of the mirror and practice introducing myself. I repeated simple sentences again and again because I knew that basic communication could help me in many situations. I said slowly, "Hello, my name is Daniel." Then I continued, "I am from Vietnam." At first, my voice sounded nervous and unnatural, but I kept practicing until the words flowed more smoothly. After that, I learned one of the most important travel questions. Where are you from? I imagined meeting travelers from different countries and asking them this simple question with a smile. In my notebook, I wrote several possible answers. I'm from Japan. I'm from France. I'm from Brazil. Practicing these conversations made me feel like I was already traveling around the world from inside my small room. I also learned how to answer another useful question. Why are you traveling? My answer was simple but honest. I'm traveling to learn English and explore new places. Every sentence became a small step forward, and every repetition reduced a little of my fear. A week before my flight, I started preparing my luggage carefully. While folding clothes into my suitcase, I practiced travel vocabulary aloud. Passport, boarding pass, suitcase, ticket, hotel reservation. I wanted these words to become familiar because I knew I would hear them many times during my trip. I also learned how to ask for help politely because I understood that traveling alone would sometimes be confusing. One sentence quickly became my favorite. Can you help me? I practiced different situations in my imagination. Excuse me, can you help me find gate 12? Can you help me with my luggage? Can you help me understand this form? I realized that asking for help was not a sign of weakness. Instead, it was an important communication skill. Every traveler needs help sometimes, especially when visiting another country for the first time. Understanding this made me feel calmer. I no longer expected myself to speak perfect English. I only needed to communicate clearly and confidently enough to continue moving forward. The next challenge was learning how to buy things and understand prices in English. I often watched travel videos where tourists bought snacks, drinks, train tickets, and souvenirs. I noticed that one simple question appeared everywhere. How much is this? Because of that, I practiced the sentence repeatedly while pretending my room was a small international market. I picked up random objects and asked imaginary shopkeepers about their prices. How much is this sandwich? How much is this backpack? How much is this ticket? Then I practiced numbers carefully because understanding prices is essential during travel. I repeated numbers from 1 to 1,000 until they became easier to recognize. Sometimes I laughed at myself because my room looked like a strange classroom mixed with a tiny airport and a shopping center. However, those small exercises slowly transformed my fear into preparation. English stopped feeling like a giant mountain and started feeling like a useful travel tool. Every evening before sleeping, I listened to basic English conversations through my headphones. At first, native speakers sounded extremely fast to me. Some words disappeared into the air before I could understand them. However, I noticed something important after several days. Even if I could not understand every single word, I could still catch the main meaning of many conversations. That realization changed my mindset completely. I understood that communication does not require perfection. It requires patience, listening, and courage. I started writing down useful expressions in a small notebook that I planned to carry everywhere during my trip. The notebook quickly filled with practical travel phrases. Where is the restroom? What time does the train leave? I need help. Can you repeat that, please? I don't understand. I knew these phrases might save me during difficult situations. More importantly, they gave me emotional support because every phrase represented preparation. One afternoon, my friend visited me while I was organizing my documents on the kitchen table. He looked at the scattered papers, my open suitcase, and the dozens of English notes attached to the walls. Then he smiled and asked, "Are you excited?" I paused for a moment because the truth was complicated. "Yes," I answered slowly. "But I'm also scared." He nodded immediately because he understood. Traveling alone to another country for the first time can feel overwhelming. Before leaving, he gave me a simple piece of advice that stayed in my mind for the rest of the trip. He said, "People don't expect perfect English. They just want to understand you." Those words relieved me more than any grammar lesson. That evening, I stopped focusing on sounding perfect and started focusing on expressing myself clearly. Instead of memorizing complicated vocabulary, I concentrated on simple, useful communication. I practiced introducing myself naturally. "Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm from Vietnam. I'm traveling to Singapore for vacation." The more I repeated these simple sentences, the more confident I became. The day before my departure arrived faster than expected. My room was filled with nervous energy. My passport rested beside my ticket on the desk while my suitcase stood near the door, completely packed and ready. I checked everything repeatedly because I was afraid of forgetting something important. Passport, wallet, phone charger, hotel reservation, travel insurance, English notebook. Every item felt essential. During dinner with my family, everyone encouraged me and asked questions about the trip. My mother worried about my safety while my father reminded me to stay calm and polite during conversations. They knew this journey meant more than tourism for me. It was also a personal challenge. After dinner, I sat alone in my room and imagined myself speaking English with airport staff, hotel workers, taxi drivers, and strangers. Some imaginary conversations went smoothly in my head, while others became awkward and confusing. Still, I kept practicing because repetition gave me comfort. Later that night, I opened my notebook again and reviewed the most important travel expressions one final time. I repeated them slowly and carefully. "Where are you from?" "I'm traveling to Singapore." "Can you help me?" "How much is this?" "Where is gate 15? "Can I have some water?" "Excuse me, I don't understand." Although these were simple sentences, they represented survival skills for international travel. I understood that language learning becomes much more meaningful when connected to real-life experiences. Memorizing vocabulary without context can feel boring and difficult, but learning English for travel created excitement inside me. Every sentence had a purpose. Every phrase could help me navigate a new environment, meet new people, or solve unexpected problems. This practical connection made studying feel alive. I barely slept that night because my mind was crowded with thoughts about the journey ahead. When my alarm rang early the next morning, my heart immediately started beating faster. I dressed quickly, grabbed my suitcase, and looked around my room one last time before leaving. The sunrise painted the streets with soft orange light while the city slowly woke up around me. During the drive to the airport, I watched buildings pass by through the car window and wondered how many adventures waited for me beyond the clouds. My hands felt cold from nervousness, so I quietly practiced English sentences inside my head during the entire ride. Good morning. Here is my passport. Where should I go? Thank you very much. Repeating those phrases helped me control my anxiety little by little. When I finally arrived at the airport, everything suddenly felt real. The building was enormous, bright, and full of movement. Travelers pushed suitcases across shiny floors while airport announcements echoed through the air in both English and other languages. I stood near the entrance for a moment and observed the crowd around me. Some people looked relaxed and experienced, while others hurried nervously toward their gates. As I listened carefully, I realized that English surrounded me everywhere. Conversations floated through the terminal continuously. Airport staff gave instructions in English. Passengers asked questions in English. Flight announcements repeated in English. My chest tightened slightly because this was the first time I had been completely surrounded by the language in a real environment. Although I had studied many useful expressions at home, hearing English everywhere made me feel nervous and small. Holding my passport tightly in one hand and my suitcase in the other, I took a deep breath and walked slowly toward the check-in counter, hoping that all my preparation would be enough for the journey ahead. I stood in front of the massive departure board while thousands of thoughts rushed through my mind at the same time. The airport felt like a small international city filled with movement, announcements, lights, and unfamiliar sounds. Everywhere I looked, people were speaking different languages, dragging heavy suitcases behind them, checking their phones, hugging family members goodbye, or rushing toward security checkpoints with nervous expressions. For a moment, I forgot all the English phrases I had practiced at home because the environment itself felt overwhelming. My hands tightened around the handle of my suitcase while I searched carefully for my flight number on the departure screen. After several seconds, I finally found it beside the words check-in counter B12. Relief washed over me immediately because understanding even one piece of information gave me confidence again. Quietly, I repeated a sentence inside my head. I can do this. Then I began walking toward the check-in area, trying to appear calmer than I actually felt. As I approached the counter, I noticed airport staff speaking fluent English with travelers from many countries. Their conversations sounded fast, smooth, and professional. Listening to them made me nervous again because I worried that I would not understand simple questions. While waiting in line, I practiced several important expressions silently. Good morning. Here is my passport. I'm traveling to Singapore. Can you help me? Repeating those phrases helped organize my thoughts. When my turn finally arrived, the airline employee smiled politely and greeted me in English. Good morning. May I see your passport and ticket? Although her voice was clear, my heart still raced as I handed over my documents. I answered carefully, yes, of course.
Here is my passport.
She typed information into her computer while asking another question. Do you have any luggage to check in? For half a second, I froze because I almost forgot the meaning of check-in luggage. Then I quickly remembered my practice lessons at home and nodded. Yes, just one suitcase. The employee placed my suitcase on the scale and attached a baggage tag to the handle. Watching the process made me feel strangely excited because this simple moment represented the beginning of my first international journey. Then she asked, would you like a window seat or an aisle seat? Thankfully, I had practiced this vocabulary before traveling. A window seat, please, I answered with growing confidence. She smiled again and printed my boarding pass. After handing it to me, she pointed toward another area and said, "Your gate is C18. Boarding begins at 10:15. I immediately focused on understanding every important word.
Gate.
Boarding.
Time.
Those details suddenly felt incredibly important. To make sure I understood correctly, I asked politely, "Excuse me, what time is boarding?" She repeated calmly, "Boarding starts at 10:15. I thanked her sincerely before leaving the counter. Even though the conversation was simple, completing it successfully felt like a personal victory. After check-in, I followed the signs toward passport control. The airport corridor seemed endless, filled with travelers walking in every direction. Large signs written in English pointed toward security, immigration, restrooms, and departure gates. I realized that airports are actually excellent places to practice English because almost every instruction appears in international language. While walking, I read signs aloud quietly to improve my pronunciation and comprehension. Passport control. Security check. International departures. Boarding gates. Reading these words in a real environment made them easier to remember than studying them from a textbook. Eventually, I arrived at the immigration line where officers checked passports carefully. The atmosphere felt serious and quiet compared to the noisy check-in area. I watched travelers step forward one by one while officers asked short questions in English. When my turn arrived, I stepped nervously toward the counter and handed over my passport. The immigration officer looked at me briefly before asking, "Where are you traveling today?" I swallowed nervously and answered, "I'm traveling to Singapore." He examined my passport for several seconds that felt much longer than they actually were. Then he asked another question. "How long will you stay there?" Thankfully, I understood immediately because I had practiced common travel questions before leaving home. "I will stay for 7 days," I replied carefully. The officer nodded slightly while typing information into his computer. Then he stamped my passport and returned it to me. "Have a good trip," he said. I smiled with relief and answered, "Thank you very much." Walking away from passport control felt like crossing an invisible border between my old comfort zone and a completely new experience. After immigration, I entered the main departure area where dozens of shops, restaurants, and waiting lounges surrounded me. Bright advertisements covered the walls while travelers sat near charging stations or lined up to buy coffee and snacks. Since I still had time before boarding, I decided to explore the area slowly while practicing English naturally whenever possible. I walked into a small convenience store because I wanted to buy a bottle of water. The cashier greeted me politely, and I immediately remembered another useful sentence from my notebook. I picked up the bottle and asked, "How much is this?" The cashier answered quickly, $3. I paid carefully while listening to every word she spoke. Although this interaction lasted less than 1 minute, it still helped build my confidence because I realized I could survive simple conversations in English outside the classroom. After leaving the store, I searched for my boarding gate. The airport looked enormous from inside, and I quickly became confused by the long hallways and crowded waiting areas. For several minutes, I walked in circles while checking the signs repeatedly. Eventually, I decided to ask for directions instead of pretending I understood everything. I approached an airport employee wearing a bright blue uniform and asked politely, "Excuse me, where is gate C18? She smiled kindly and pointed down a nearby corridor. "Go straight, then turn left near the cafe. You'll see gate C18 beside the bookstore." I listened carefully because understanding directions in English can sometimes feel difficult when people speak quickly. To confirm that I understood correctly, I repeated the instructions aloud. "Go straight, then turn left near the cafe." She nodded immediately. That's right. I thanked her before continuing through the airport with renewed confidence. As I walked toward the gate, I noticed how often travelers use simple English expressions to communicate. Some people asked airport staff for help while others checked flight information together. A mother explained boarding procedures to her children in English. Two tourists asked each other about departure times. An elderly traveler requested assistance finding a restroom. Suddenly, English no longer felt like a distant academic subject hidden inside grammar books. It felt alive. It moved through the airport constantly, like an invisible bridge connecting strangers from different countries. Realizing this changed the way I thought about language learning completely. English was not only about exams or memorization. It was about connection, navigation, and experience. Eventually, I reached gate C18 and sat near the large windows overlooking the runway. Outside, enormous airplanes moved slowly across the airport like giant mechanical birds preparing for flight. I watched airport workers load luggage while pilots walked confidently through restricted areas. Every few minutes, announcements echoed through the speakers in English first, and then in another language. At first, I understood only small parts of the announcements, but after listening carefully several times, I began recognizing important phrases. Now boarding. Final call. Delayed. Passengers traveling to Singapore. These repeated expressions slowly became familiar. I even opened my notebook again and added several new phrases that I heard around me. Learning directly from real situations felt exciting because every sentence had immediate meaning. While waiting near the gate, I started a small conversation with another traveler sitting beside me. He noticed my English notebook and smiled politely before asking, "Is this your first international trip?" His question surprised me because I actually understood it immediately without translating inside my head. "Yes," I answered honestly. "I'm a little nervous." He laughed kindly and said, "Everyone feels nervous the first time." Then he introduced himself and explained that he traveled frequently for work. We talked for several minutes about airports, food, and travel experiences using simple English. Although my grammar was not perfect, the conversation flowed naturally enough for both of us to understand each other. That moment became extremely important for me because it proved that communication matters more than perfection. A few minutes later, the boarding announcement finally echoed across the waiting area. My heart immediately started beating faster again. Passengers stood up, collected their bags, and formed a line near the gate entrance. I checked my boarding pass several times to make sure I was standing in the correct line. When I reached the front, the airline employee scanned my ticket and smiled politely before saying, "Have a pleasant flight." I thanked her and walked slowly through the long boarding bridge connected to the airplane. Every step felt unreal because I had imagined this moment for so long. Through the small windows beside the bridge, I could see the enormous airplane waiting outside under the bright morning sky. When I finally stepped inside the cabin, I paused briefly and looked around with amazement. Flight attendants welcomed passengers in English, while travelers searched for their seats and stored luggage overhead. Holding my boarding pass tightly in one hand, I walked carefully down the aisle toward my seat with excitement rising inside me. A few moments later, I sat beside the window, fastened my seatbelt, and realized with disbelief that I had successfully boarded the airplane and officially begun my first journey abroad. As soon as I sat down beside the window, I felt a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness rising inside me again. The airplane cabin looked both familiar and completely new at the same time because I had seen airplanes many times in movies and travel videos, yet experiencing one from the inside felt entirely different. Soft lights glowed above the seats while passengers continued placing bags into overhead compartments and searching for their assigned rows. Flight attendants moved calmly through the aisle, smiling politely and helping travelers settle into their seats. I looked down at my boarding pass, once more just to confirm that I had not accidentally taken the wrong seat. Thankfully, the number matched perfectly. I had successfully found my window seat, one of the travel experiences I had dreamed about for years. Outside the small oval window, airport workers guided vehicles across the runway while giant airplane wings stretched proudly beneath the morning sky. I could hardly believe that within a short time, I would leave my country for the first time in my life. While waiting for departure, I focused carefully on the English conversations happening around me. A flight attendant stopped near my row and asked another passenger, "Would you like help with your luggage?" A businessman nearby requested coffee, while a young child asked for juice. Listening to these simple interactions made me realize how important everyday vocabulary becomes during travel. Words like window seat, aisle seat, seatbelt, water, and coffee suddenly felt much more real than they had inside textbooks. I quietly repeated them inside my mind to strengthen my memory. A few minutes later, a flight attendant approached me with a warm smile and asked, "Excuse me, sir, could you fasten your seatbelt, please?" Although I understood her immediately, nervousness still made me react slowly for a second. Then I quickly grabbed the belt beside my seat and clicked it into place. "Thank you," she said kindly before continuing down the aisle. That small interaction made me feel strangely proud because I had understood and responded correctly in a real English-speaking situation. Soon afterward, the safety demonstration began. Flight attendants demonstrated emergency procedures while instructions played through the speakers in English. I listened carefully because understanding safety vocabulary felt important during international travel. Please fasten your seatbelt. Locate the nearest emergency exit. Turn off electronic devices during takeoff. Some announcements moved too quickly for me to understand every word, but I focused on identifying key phrases instead of panicking about missing details. That strategy helped me stay calm. I remembered something important from my English practice before the trip. Understanding the main idea is often more valuable than understanding every individual word. While the airplane slowly moved away from the gate, I pressed my forehead gently against the cool window and watched the airport buildings slide past outside. My heart beat faster and faster with anticipation. Then the airplane accelerated across the runway with incredible force. The engine roared loudly while the ground outside blurred beneath us. For a brief moment, fear tightened inside my chest, but excitement quickly replaced it as the airplane lifted smoothly into the air. I watched the city become smaller beneath the clouds while sunlight flooded across the wing outside my window. It was one of the most beautiful moments I had ever experienced. I suddenly understood why people love traveling so deeply. Leaving the ground physically also felt symbolic emotionally, as if I were rising above years of hesitation and fear. English was no longer just a subject I studied at home. It had become part of a real adventure carrying me across the sky toward another country. After the airplane reached a stable altitude, the atmosphere inside the cabin became quieter and more relaxed. Some passengers opened laptops while others listened to music or watched movies on personal screens. A flight attendant pushed a service cart slowly down the aisle, offering drinks to passengers. When she reached my row, she smiled politely and asked, "Would you like something to drink?" Although I had practiced this moment in my imagination many times, my voice still sounded slightly nervous when I answered. "Could I have some water, please?" She handed me a small cup with a friendly smile. "Of course." Then she asked another passenger nearby, "Coffee or juice?" Listening carefully to these simple exchanges helped reinforce useful travel vocabulary naturally inside my mind. I realized that repetition through real-life situations makes language learning much more effective. As the flight continued, I became more comfortable observing the small details around me. The cabin lights dimmed softly, while clouds drifted endlessly outside the window like giant white mountains floating across the sky. I took out my notebook and wrote down useful airplane vocabulary that I had heard during the flight. Seatbelt, tray table, window seat, overhead compartment, landing card, cabin crew. Writing these words while experiencing them directly helped create strong memories connected to real situations. I also practiced forming simple sentences using the vocabulary. My seatbelt is fastened. I have a window seat. Could I have some coffee? Where's the restroom? Instead of feeling like boring homework, the learning process now felt alive and meaningful because every sentence related to my surroundings. Several hours into the flight, the passenger sitting beside me started a conversation after noticing my notebook again. He introduced himself in friendly English and asked where I was from. This time, I answered much more confidently than before. I'm from Vietnam, I replied naturally. Then I asked him the same question. Where are you from? He smiled and told me he was from Australia. For the next 20 minutes, we exchanged simple travel stories while looking occasionally through the airplane window at the endless ocean below. Sometimes I struggled to find the right vocabulary, but instead of becoming embarrassed, I used simpler words to continue communicating. That experience taught me another valuable lesson about speaking English. Fluency does not mean using difficult words all the time. Sometimes simple language spoken clearly creates the strongest communication. Later, lunch service began inside the cabin. Flight attendants distributed meals while asking passengers questions in English. Chicken or pasta? Would you like tea or coffee? I listened carefully to every interaction around me because airplane conversations often repeat practical travel expressions many times. When my turn arrived, I answered more smoothly than earlier in the flight. Chicken, please, and some juice. Even though the exchange lasted only a few seconds, I felt my confidence improving little by little. Small successes accumulated quietly during the journey. Every understood question and every completed sentence reduced my fear of speaking English. While eating beside the window, I watched sunlight reflect across the clouds outside and realized how far I had already traveled from the nervous person standing outside the airport entrance earlier that morning. As the airplane gradually approached its destination, announcements filled the cabin once again. Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our descent shortly. Passengers adjusted their seats, closed tray tables, and fastened seatbelts again. I carefully followed every instruction while observing how experienced travelers behaved around me. The city below slowly appeared through gaps in the clouds, revealing endless buildings, highways, and bright lights stretching toward the horizon. My excitement returned immediately because I knew a completely new chapter of the journey was about to begin. At the same time, nervousness returned as well because I would soon need to navigate a foreign airport alone. To calm myself, I quietly reviewed useful English expressions inside my head again. Where's the baggage claim? Can you help me? Excuse me, I don't understand. Repeating these sentences felt comforting, almost like carrying familiar tools into unfamiliar territory. The airplane landed smoothly on the runway while passengers around me applauded softly with relief. I smiled automatically because despite all my fears before departure, I had successfully completed my first international flight. After the airplane stopped at the gate, everyone stood up quickly and began collecting luggage from overhead compartments. I followed the crowd slowly through the airport corridors, carefully reading English signs directing passengers toward immigration and baggage claim. Everything around me looked modern, enormous, and slightly overwhelming. Still, I felt more confident than before because I had already survived many English conversations successfully during the journey. Eventually, I reached the baggage claim area where suitcases moved endlessly around giant conveyor belts. I waited patiently while watching travelers collect their bags one by one. Minutes passed. Then more minutes passed. Gradually, the crowd around the conveyor belt became smaller and smaller until only a few passengers remained. My heartbeat quickened as I realized something was wrong. My suitcase never appeared. I stared at the empty conveyor belt in disbelief, while airport announcements echoed softly through the terminal. The airplane had landed safely, but somehow my luggage had disappeared inside the airport. For several long minutes, I stood beside the silent conveyor belt staring at the empty space where my suitcase should have appeared. Travelers around me slowly disappeared one by one until the baggage claim area became strangely quiet. My excitement about arriving in a foreign country suddenly transformed into anxiety. Inside my missing suitcase were my clothes, personal items, travel supplies, and several important documents. I tried to remain calm, but my thoughts moved chaotically through my mind. I looked carefully around the room again, hoping I had simply missed my luggage while distracted, yet the conveyor belt remained empty. At that moment, I realized that this was the first real travel problem I needed to solve completely in English. My heart beat faster as I searched for someone who could help me. Eventually, I noticed a nearby sign that read "Lost and Found Baggage Assistance." Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my backpack tightly and walked toward the service counter, while silently repeating useful phrases inside my head. A woman wearing an airport uniform greeted me politely as I approached the counter. "Good evening. How can I help you?" she asked calmly. Although nervousness tightened my chest, I remembered the sentence I had practiced before the trip. "I can't find my bag," I answered carefully. She nodded immediately without looking surprised, which made me feel slightly more relaxed. "Okay," she replied kindly. "Can I see your baggage tag and boarding pass?" Thankfully, I understood her question clearly because I had learned travel vocabulary before leaving home. I quickly opened my passport holder and handed her the small baggage receipt attached during check-in. She typed information into the computer while asking another important question. "What does your luggage look like?" For a second, my mind became blank because describing objects in English had always been difficult for me. However, I forced myself to stay calm and began searching for simple vocabulary instead of complicated sentences. "My suitcase is large and black," I explained slowly. "It has 4 wheels and a red sticker near the handle." The airport employee listened patiently while typing notes into the system. Then she asked another question. "Is there anything special attached to the bag?" I thought carefully for a moment before remembering the small blue ribbon tied around one side of the handle. "Yes," I answered quickly. "There is a blue ribbon on the handle." She smiled slightly and nodded. "That will help us identify it." Hearing those words gave me a little hope. I realized something important during that conversation. Even though my English was imperfect, simple descriptions could still communicate useful information clearly. I did not need advanced grammar to solve practical travel problems. I only needed calmness, patience, and enough vocabulary to explain the situation. The employee continued searching through the airport system while I waited nervously beside the counter. Every few seconds, she clicked through new screens and examined lists of baggage information. Finally, she looked up and said, "It seems your luggage did not arrive on this flight." My stomach tightened immediately, but she quickly continued speaking before panic could fully take over. "Don't worry. Sometimes bags arrive on the next flight." I listened carefully to every word because understanding the situation felt extremely important. Then she handed me a document and said, "Please fill out this form." I stared at the paper for a moment because it contained many English words related to travel details, addresses, and baggage descriptions. Although I understood most of the information, completing official forms in another language still felt intimidating. Slowly and carefully, I began filling out the form while checking unfamiliar vocabulary on my phone. The document requested my full name, passport number, flight number, hotel address, and detailed baggage description. I realized that understanding basic English writing skills is just as important as speaking during travel. Every international airport uses forms, signs, and written instructions constantly. While completing the paperwork, I silently practiced useful expressions connected to travel emergencies. My luggage is missing. When will my bag arrive? Can you contact my hotel? What should I do now? Repeating these phrases helped me feel mentally prepared if additional problems appeared later. After I finished the form, the airport employee reviewed the information carefully before entering more details into the computer system. Then she explained the next steps slowly so I could understand clearly. "We will contact you when your luggage arrives," she said. "Please keep your phone available." She also handed me a printed reference number and explained that I could use it to track my baggage online. I thanked her sincerely because despite my anxiety, she had remained patient and professional throughout the entire conversation. Before leaving, I asked one more question carefully. "How long does it usually take?" She answered honestly. "Sometimes only a few hours. Sometimes one day." Although the uncertainty still worried me, I felt relieved knowing that the situation was being handled. Leaving the baggage assistance area felt emotionally exhausting. My first hours in a foreign country had already become far more stressful than I imagined. However, as I walked slowly through the airport terminal, I also noticed something surprising. Despite the problem, I had successfully managed an important English conversation entirely on my own. I had explained my situation, answered questions, described my luggage, completed forms, and understood instructions from airport staff. Earlier in my life, I would have believed such a situation was impossible for me. Yet now I had survived it in reality. That realization slowly replaced some of my frustration with confidence. Problems during travel are unavoidable, but communication skills can transform frightening situations into manageable ones. Eventually, I followed signs leading toward the airport exit while observing the busy arrival hall around me. Families reunited emotionally near the entrance, while taxi drivers waited beside large signs displaying hotel names. Bright advertisements covered the walls while announcements echoed softly through the building. I suddenly felt extremely tired from the long journey and emotional stress. All I wanted now was to reach my hotel, take a shower, and rest. However, even that simple goal required another real-world English challenge. I needed to find transportation from the airport to the city center. Outside the terminal, rows of taxis waited beneath bright lights while drivers spoke with travelers from around the world. I hesitated briefly before approaching the official taxi service counter. A man behind the counter greeted me politely and asked, "Where are you going?" I quickly showed him the hotel address saved on my phone because I worried about pronouncing the street name incorrectly. He examined the address before nodding. "Okay, the taxi stand is outside door 4. Then he explained the approximate travel time and estimated price. Listening carefully, I realized that my ability to understand numbers and directions in English had improved significantly since arriving at the airport. Earlier, every conversation felt terrifying. Now, although I still felt nervous, I could focus more clearly on understanding information instead of panicking. Before leaving the counter, I asked another useful question. "How much will it cost approximately?" The employee answered with a number that sounded reasonable based on my travel research. Outside the airport, warm evening air wrapped around me while traffic lights reflected across wet streets from recent rain. The city looked alive, modern, and unfamiliar beneath glowing skyscrapers and moving cars. I walked toward the taxi line while holding my backpack tightly because it now contained almost everything important I still possessed. A taxi driver opened the trunk politely and asked, "Do you have luggage?" For a brief second, I almost laughed at the strange irony of the question. "Only this backpack," I answered while explaining that my suitcase was missing at the airport. The driver nodded sympathetically before helping me into the car. Once inside, I watched the airport slowly disappear behind us through the window while the city lights stretched endlessly ahead. As the taxi moved through crowded streets toward the hotel district, I leaned back quietly against the seat and reflected on everything that had happened since leaving home. The trip had already taught me more practical English in one day than months of isolated textbook study. At the airport, language was no longer theoretical. Every phrase carried real consequences. "I can't find my bag. What does your luggage look like? Please fill out this form." These were not just classroom examples anymore. They had become survival tools connected directly to emotions, decisions, and experiences. Despite the stress of losing my luggage, I felt strangely proud of myself. I had faced confusion, fear, and uncertainty in another language without giving up. As the taxi continued through the glowing city streets toward my hotel, exhaustion slowly mixed with excitement once again because I knew my journey abroad had truly begun. The taxi finally slowed down in front of a tall modern building glowing softly beneath the city lights. Large glass doors reflected the busy street outside while elegant golden letters displayed the hotel's name above the entrance. After the stress of the airport and the missing luggage problem, simply arriving at my destination felt like a small victory. I stepped out of the taxi carefully, thanked the driver in English, and stood silently for a moment while observing the hotel lobby through the glass entrance. Travelers moved quietly across the polished floor while soft music played in the background. Behind a long marble desk, several receptionists welcomed guests with professional smiles. Although I felt exhausted from the long flight and emotional tension, I also felt another wave of nervousness because I needed to complete yet another important English conversation successfully. I pulled my backpack higher onto my shoulder and walked toward the reception desk slowly, while reviewing useful hotel phrases inside my head. "I have a reservation. Can I check in? What time is breakfast?" Repeating these expressions gave me confidence because I already understood their meanings clearly. When I reached the counter, the receptionist greeted me warmly. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the hotel." Her calm tone immediately made the environment feel less intimidating. I smiled politely before answering, "Good evening. I have a reservation." She nodded and began typing into the computer while asking for my passport. This time, unlike my earlier airport conversations, I noticed that my hands no longer shook nervously while speaking English. Little by little, real travel experience was replacing fear with familiarity. The receptionist examined my reservation details for several seconds before smiling again. "Yes, Mr. Daniel. We have your booking here." Hearing my own name spoken confidently in another country felt strangely exciting. Then she continued speaking. "You reserved a single room for 6 nights, correct?" Thankfully, I already knew the meaning of single room because I had studied hotel vocabulary before traveling. "Yes, that's correct," I answered clearly. She handed me a registration form and politely requested additional information. While filling out the document, I realized once again how useful practical English becomes during travel. Hotels, airports, and transportation systems constantly require travelers to read forms, signs, and instructions. Understanding these details can make international travel much smoother and less stressful. After I completed the form, the receptionist explained several hotel services carefully. Breakfast is served from 6:30 until 10 o'clock on the second floor, she said. I listened closely because I wanted to remember every important detail. Then I asked another useful question from my notebook practice. What time is breakfast? Although she had already explained it once, asking again helped confirm my understanding while also giving me additional speaking practice. She repeated the information patiently before handing me a small plastic card. This is your key card, she explained. You will need it to enter your room and use the elevator. I examined the card carefully while mentally repeating the new vocabulary.
Key card.
Reception. Single room. Each real-life object helped strengthen my memory naturally. Before going upstairs, I explained my luggage situation briefly to the receptionist because I worried the airport might deliver my suitcase later during the night. My luggage is missing, I told her. The airport may contact me tomorrow. She listened sympathetically and reassured me that hotel staff could receive the suitcase if it arrived while I was outside. Her understanding attitude immediately reduced some of my anxiety. Then she pointed toward the elevators and gave final instructions about the room location. Your room is on the 12th floor, she said. If you need anything, please contact reception anytime. I thanked her sincerely before walking toward the elevator with growing relief. Inside the elevator, exhaustion suddenly washed over me now that the day's major challenges were finally ending. I leaned quietly against the wall while watching the floor numbers rise slowly one by one. My reflection in the mirrored elevator doors looked tired, but also slightly different from the nervous traveler who had left home earlier that morning. Throughout the journey, I had already survived airport check-in, passport control, airplane conversations, lost luggage reporting, and hotel registration entirely in English. Even though my grammar remained imperfect, communication was still possible. That realization continued changing the way I viewed language learning. Confidence did not appear magically before action. Instead, confidence grew gradually through repeated experiences. When the elevator doors opened on the 12th floor, a quiet carpeted hallway stretched ahead beneath warm yellow lights. I followed the room numbers carefully until I reached my door. For a brief second, I struggled to use the key card correctly and worried I had misunderstood the instructions. Then the small green light finally appeared, and the door unlocked with a soft click. I stepped inside slowly and looked around with relief. The room was simple but comfortable, containing a bed, desk, television, and large window overlooking the city skyline. After the chaos of the airport, the quiet atmosphere felt peaceful and safe. I placed my backpack carefully on the chair and stood beside the window for several minutes while watching cars move far below across glowing streets. Although I was extremely tired, curiosity about the city still filled my mind. Everything outside looked exciting and unfamiliar. Neon signs reflected across wet roads while crowds of people continued moving through restaurants, shops, and sidewalks late into the evening. I imagined all the conversations, stories, and adventures happening beyond the hotel walls. At the same time, I also realized how much English surrounded daily life during travel. Menus, transportation signs, advertisements, hotel instructions, emergency exits, elevators, and customer service conversations all depended heavily on language. Traveling abroad was not only about sightseeing. It was constant communication practice connected to real emotions and real situations. After taking a quick shower, I sat at the desk and opened my notebook again despite my exhaustion. I wanted to record everything I had learned during the day before forgetting important details. I wrote down useful hotel vocabulary first. Reception. Single room. Key card. Reservation. Check-in. Then I added several complete sentences connected to my real experiences. I have a reservation. Can I check in? What time is breakfast? My luggage is missing. Could you help me? Reading these expressions now felt completely different from reading them at home before the trip. Every sentence carried emotional memories attached to actual experiences. Eventually, I lay down on the bed while thinking about the next day's possibilities. Despite losing my luggage temporarily, I had successfully arrived in another country and managed multiple important situations independently. That thought filled me with quiet pride. Earlier in my life, speaking English to strangers had seemed terrifying. Now I had already used English at airports, on airplanes, in shops, and inside a hotel. Of course, I still made mistakes and sometimes needed people to repeat themselves, but communication still happened successfully. That understanding removed much of the fear I once connected to language learning. Before falling asleep, I walked once more toward the hotel window and looked out across the enormous city glowing beneath the night sky. Tomorrow would be my first full day exploring this unfamiliar place alone. I imagined visiting famous landmarks, ordering local food, asking for directions, and speaking with people from different countries. The thought still made me nervous, but now the nervousness felt mixed with excitement instead of fear. Slowly, I opened my notebook one final time and wrote a short plan for the next day. I wanted to visit the city center, explore nearby streets, practice speaking English naturally, and experience as much as possible. Then I closed the notebook, turned off the lights, and finally rested peacefully while dreaming about the adventures waiting for me in the morning. The next morning, I woke up earlier than expected because excitement pushed away most of my exhaustion. Soft sunlight entered through the hotel window while the city below slowly came alive with movement and noise. For several minutes, I stood quietly beside the glass watching buses, taxis, and crowds of people move through the streets far beneath me. Everything looked unfamiliar, yet strangely inviting at the same time. After preparing for the day, I went downstairs to the restaurant area for breakfast. Remembering yesterday's conversation with the receptionist, I now understood hotel vocabulary much more naturally. I greeted the staff confidently, found a table near the window, and listened carefully to the English conversations happening around me. Travelers from many different countries discussed sightseeing plans, transportation routes, shopping areas, and famous attractions. Listening to them made me feel even more excited about exploring the city myself. After breakfast, I returned briefly to my room and opened the city map I had received at reception the previous night. I circled several famous tourist destinations that I wanted to visit during my stay. Among them, one location interested me most because I had seen beautiful photographs of it online for years. The problem was that the transportation system looked confusing on the map, especially since many street names were completely unfamiliar. Still, I reminded myself that this journey was not only about sightseeing. It was also about learning how to communicate confidently in English during real situations. I placed the map carefully inside my backpack, checked my phone battery, and left the hotel with determination growing inside me. Outside, the city felt even larger and busier than it had from the hotel window. Tall buildings stretched toward the sky, while traffic flowed continuously through crowded intersections. Street signs, advertisements, restaurant menus, and train station information surrounded me everywhere in English. Although the environment felt overwhelming at first, I also noticed something important. Compared to the nervous traveler who arrived at the airport 2 days earlier, I now felt more prepared to handle unfamiliar situations. I walked several blocks confidently while observing shops, cafes, and public transportation signs. Eventually, I reached a subway station entrance crowded with commuters rushing toward different platforms. Inside the station, I immediately became confused by the transportation map displayed above the ticket machines. Colored train lines crossed one another in complicated patterns while station names stretched endlessly across the wall. I studied the map carefully for several minutes, but still could not understand which train I needed. Earlier in my life, confusion like this would have caused panic immediately. However, traveling had already taught me an important lesson. Asking for help is not weakness. It is part of communication. Gathering my courage, I approached a nearby station employee wearing a bright uniform and asked politely, "Excuse me, how can I get to the museum?" The employee smiled kindly before examining the map beside us. "You need the blue line," he explained while pointing toward one section of the station. "Go straight, then turn right near the stairs. The train platform will be downstairs." I listened carefully because understanding directions in English still required strong concentration from me. To confirm that I understood correctly, I repeated his instructions slowly. "Go straight, then turn right." He nodded immediately. "Yes, exactly." I thanked him sincerely before following the directions through the crowded station. While walking, I quietly repeated the phrases inside my head again. Go straight. Turn right. Turn left. These simple expressions suddenly felt extremely valuable because they connected directly to movement and navigation in real life. After purchasing a subway ticket successfully, I boarded the train and watched the city blur past outside the windows. Around me, passengers looked relaxed and comfortable, reading books, checking phones, or listening to music. Meanwhile, I continued observing English signs and announcements carefully. Every station name, emergency instruction, and transportation notice became another small learning opportunity. Traveling was teaching me English naturally through repetition and necessity rather than memorization alone. I no longer studied vocabulary only from textbooks. I encountered language through real experiences connected to emotions, locations, and decisions. Unfortunately, after leaving the subway station near the museum district, I quickly realized that I had become lost again. The streets outside looked completely different from the map on my phone because construction barriers blocked several roads. Tall buildings surrounded me while crowds of tourists moved in every direction. For a brief moment, frustration returned because I worried about wasting valuable time wandering through unfamiliar streets. However, instead of panicking, I reminded myself to focus calmly on communication. I approached a woman standing beside a cafe entrance and asked politely, "Excuse me, how can I get to the museum?" She answered quickly while pointing toward a nearby intersection. "Go straight for 2 blocks, then turn left at the traffic light." Although I understood most of her instructions, I still felt uncertain about one detail. In the past, embarrassment might have stopped me from asking for clarification. Now, however, I understood that effective communication sometimes requires additional questions. "Sorry," I said politely. "Could you repeat that, please?" She smiled patiently and repeated the directions more slowly. This time, I understood clearly. Go straight for 2 blocks, then turn left. I thanked her again before continuing through the busy streets with growing confidence. That small interaction taught me another valuable communication skill. Asking people to repeat information is completely normal during language learning. Most people appreciate honest effort much more than silent confusion. As I continued walking through the city, I noticed that my fear of speaking English was slowly disappearing. Earlier conversations at airports and hotels had already improved my confidence, but navigating the city independently created an even stronger sense of achievement. Every successful interaction proved that communication was possible even without perfect grammar or advanced vocabulary. I started paying closer attention to how local people gave directions in English. They often used very simple expressions. Go straight. Turn left. It's next to the bank. You can't miss it. Real-life English conversations were often much simpler than the complicated textbook dialogues I studied years earlier. Eventually, after nearly an hour of walking, asking questions, and checking maps repeatedly, I finally reached the famous museum I had hoped to visit. The enormous building stood proudly in the center of a crowded square filled with tourists taking photographs beneath bright afternoon sunlight. Relief and excitement rushed through me immediately because despite getting lost several times, I had successfully navigated the city alone using English communication skills. I stood there smiling for several moments while observing the lively atmosphere around me. Street musicians performed near the entrance while tourists from many countries gathered around tour guides speaking different languages. While admiring the museum exterior, I noticed a small group of travelers struggling to take a group photo near the fountain outside. One of them approached me politely and asked in English if I could help take their picture. I agreed immediately and returned the camera after capturing several photos successfully. Then we started talking casually about the city, travel experiences, and famous attractions nearby. To my surprise, the conversation flowed much more naturally than I expected. They asked where I was from, how long I planned to stay, and which places I wanted to visit next. This time, instead of feeling terrified during English conversation, I actually enjoyed it. We laughed together while sharing stories about getting lost in unfamiliar cities and trying local food abroad. Eventually, they invited me to join them for coffee after visiting the museum. Standing there among new international friends in the middle of a foreign city, I suddenly realized how much had changed since the beginning of my journey. The nervous traveler who once feared every English sentence was slowly becoming someone capable of exploring the world with curiosity, confidence, and genuine connection. After spending several enjoyable hours exploring the museum with my new international friends, I slowly began feeling hungry as the afternoon sunlight faded across the city. We walked together through crowded streets filled with restaurants, cafes, food stalls, and colorful signs advertising local dishes in both English and the local language. Delicious smells drifted through the warm evening air, while groups of tourists laughed together beside outdoor tables. Although I had practiced many useful travel expressions before leaving home, ordering food in English still felt slightly intimidating because restaurants often move quickly and require spontaneous conversation. However, compared to the nervous traveler who had arrived at the airport days earlier, I now felt much more willing to communicate without fear of making mistakes. One of my new friends suggested trying a famous local restaurant nearby, and everyone agreed immediately. The restaurant stood on a lively street corner beneath glowing lanterns and bright neon signs. Inside, the atmosphere felt warm, energetic, and welcoming. Waiters moved quickly between crowded tables while the sounds of conversation, dishes, and soft music filled the room. As we sat down together, I noticed menus placed neatly beside each table setting. One of the first useful restaurant expressions I had studied before traveling immediately returned to my mind. I smiled politely at the waiter and asked, "Can I see the menu?" Even though the menu was already beside me, saying the sentence aloud still felt valuable because I wanted to practice real-world English naturally whenever possible. The waiter handed me another menu containing English translations for tourists, which immediately made me feel more comfortable. As I examined the menu carefully, I realized how much practical vocabulary restaurants require. Different sections displayed appetizers, soups, noodles, rice dishes, seafood, desserts, coffee, tea, and cold drinks. Some words were familiar, while others were completely new to me. Thankfully, my friends helped explain several local dishes while also encouraging me to ask questions directly in English. I practiced useful food expressions silently inside my mind. What do you recommend? Is this spicy? What is this made from? I understood that restaurants are excellent places to improve speaking confidence because conversations there are usually short, practical, and repetitive. Every interaction follows a fairly predictable structure, making it easier for language learners to participate. When the waiter returned to take our order, my heart still beat slightly faster despite all the progress I had made during the trip. However, this time nervousness felt manageable instead of overwhelming. The waiter smiled politely and asked, "Are you ready to order?" One by one, my friends requested different dishes and drinks confidently. Then the waiter turned toward me. For a brief moment, I worried about pronunciation again, but I reminded myself to focus on communication instead of perfection. "I'd like fried rice, please," I answered carefully. Then I added, "And could I have some iced tea?" The waiter nodded immediately and repeated the order to confirm everything correctly. Successfully completing such a simple conversation filled me with satisfaction because I realized how far my confidence had grown in only a few days. While waiting for the food, our conversation continued naturally in English. We shared travel stories, discussed our home countries, and exchanged recommendations about places worth visiting. Sometimes I still needed extra time to form sentences, but I no longer felt embarrassed about pauses or mistakes. Instead of worrying constantly about grammar, I focused more on understanding and connection. One of my friends explained that this mindset is actually very important for improving language fluency. According to her, many learners remain silent because they fear mistakes too much. However, communication improves only through practice, experience, and repeated interaction. Listening to her made me reflect deeply on my own journey. Before traveling, English had felt like a difficult academic subject. Now it felt like a living bridge connecting people from completely different backgrounds. Soon the waiter returned carrying steaming plates filled with colorful food. The smell alone made everyone smile immediately. My fried rice looked delicious, mixed with vegetables, eggs, and local spices that I had never tasted before. As we began eating together, I noticed many opportunities to learn additional food vocabulary naturally through conversation. We talked about flavors, ingredients, drinks, desserts, and cooking styles while sharing dishes across the table. I learned useful words such as sweet, salty, spicy, grilled, fried, and seafood. Because the conversation happened during a relaxed and enjoyable moment, the vocabulary became easier to remember emotionally. Real experiences create stronger memories than isolated memorization. Halfway through dinner, I became curious about one traditional dish another table had ordered. The food looked beautiful and smelled incredible, so I decided to practice another useful restaurant question directly with the waiter. When he passed nearby again, I politely asked, "Excuse me, what local dish do you recommend?" He smiled enthusiastically and described several popular meals using simple English. Although I did not understand every single word, I successfully understood the main ideas because he spoke slowly and clearly. Eventually, he recommended a famous local dessert that many tourists enjoy trying for the first time. I ordered it immediately because part of traveling means remaining open to unfamiliar experiences. As the evening continued, the restaurant grew even louder and more energetic. New customers arrived constantly while waiters moved rapidly between tables carrying trays filled with food and drinks. Despite the noise, I noticed something remarkable happening inside myself. English conversations that once felt terrifying now felt increasingly natural. Of course, I still made mistakes and occasionally misunderstood certain expressions, but those moments no longer destroyed my confidence completely. Instead, I simply asked questions, requested clarification, or used simpler vocabulary to continue communicating. That flexibility represented enormous personal growth compared to the fearful person who once practiced basic introductions nervously in front of a bedroom mirror. Eventually, after finishing our meal and dessert, the conversation slowed while everyone relaxed comfortably around the table. The waiter approached politely and asked if we needed anything else. I decided to practice one final restaurant expression from my travel notebook. Smiling confidently, I asked, "Could I get the bill, please?" The waiter nodded immediately before bringing the check several moments later. Although it was a very simple sentence, using it successfully in a real restaurant still felt rewarding because every completed interaction strengthened my confidence little by little. Language learning often progresses through small victories that gradually accumulate into major personal transformation. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, one of my new friends suddenly mentioned that a local cultural celebration was happening nearby that evening. She explained that several local families and travelers would gather together for music, traditional food, games, and conversation. Then she smiled and invited me to join them. At first, I hesitated slightly because spending an entire evening socializing in English still sounded intimidating. However, another part of me felt excited by the opportunity. After all, the purpose of this journey was not only to visit famous places, but also to experience genuine human connection through communication. Remembering how much I had already accomplished since arriving in the country, I finally smiled and accepted the invitation. Together, we walked out into the glowing city streets beneath the warm night sky while laughter, music, and the promise of new experiences waited somewhere ahead of us. The local celebration lasted late into the night, filled with music, laughter, traditional performances, and conversations that continued flowing naturally between travelers and local residents. By the time I finally returned to the hotel, I felt emotionally exhausted in the best possible way. The evening had shown me something important about communication. English did not need to sound perfect in order to create meaningful experiences. Throughout the celebration, I had spoken with people from different countries using simple vocabulary, clear expressions, gestures, and shared curiosity. Sometimes I paused while searching for words, but instead of feeling embarrassed, I simply continued speaking. Little by little, I was beginning to trust my ability to communicate. The next morning, after waking up later than usual, I decided to spend the day exploring local markets and shopping streets because I wanted to buy souvenirs for my family back home. After breakfast at the hotel, I opened my notebook again and reviewed several useful shopping expressions before leaving the room. How much is this? Do you have a cheaper one? Can I pay by card? I repeated the phrases several times because bargaining and shopping conversations often happen quickly in busy markets. I also reviewed numbers carefully since understanding prices is extremely important during travel. Earlier in my life, numbers spoken quickly in English often confused me, especially during conversations involving money. However, repeated exposure during airports, restaurants, and transportation had already improved my listening skills noticeably. Feeling more confident, I placed my wallet carefully inside my backpack and left the hotel excited for another day of exploration. The shopping district was already crowded when I arrived. Long streets overflowed with colorful signs, souvenir shops, clothing stores, local crafts, and open-air market stalls. Vendors called out cheerfully to passing tourists, while music played from nearby cafes. Everywhere I looked, I saw objects that represented the culture of the city. Handmade jewelry, traditional clothing, painted artwork, keychains, magnets, snacks, and decorative items filled every corner of the market. The atmosphere felt energetic and alive. At first, I simply wandered slowly between shops while observing prices and listening carefully to English conversations around me. Many tourists asked similar questions repeatedly, which helped reinforce useful shopping vocabulary naturally in my mind. Eventually, I stopped at a small souvenir stand selling handmade wooden crafts. Several carved figures immediately caught my attention because they reminded me of my younger brother back home. I picked one up carefully and smiled at the vendor before asking one of the most important shopping questions in English. How much is this? The vendor answered quickly while typing a number into a calculator. Although the price was not unreasonable, I remembered that bargaining is common in many local markets. Nervously, but curiously, I decided to practice another useful phrase from my notebook. Do you have a cheaper one? For a brief second, I worried that the question might sound rude, but the vendor simply laughed warmly and pointed toward a smaller version of the same item. This one is less expensive, he explained in clear English. Then he lowered the original price slightly as part of the negotiation process. I suddenly realized that bargaining conversations are often friendly social interactions rather than uncomfortable conflicts. Encouraged by this discovery, I continued asking simple questions about the products. Is this handmade? Where is this from? What wood is this made of? The vendor answered patiently while explaining local traditions connected to the crafts. Listening to him taught me not only vocabulary but also cultural knowledge connected to the objects around me. Traveling abroad constantly reminded me that language and culture are deeply connected. After purchasing the wooden souvenir successfully, I continued exploring deeper into the market streets. The further I walked, the more confident I became using English naturally during short interactions. I asked about prices, compared products, thanked shopkeepers, and occasionally practiced small conversations about my home country. Earlier in my journey, every English sentence required enormous mental effort. Now, many simple expressions emerged automatically, without long hesitation. That change surprised me because I had not noticed the improvement happening gradually day by day. Real progress often develops quietly through repeated experiences instead of dramatic moments. Later that afternoon, I entered a clothing store because I wanted to buy gifts for my parents. The shop displayed beautiful scarves, shirts, and traditional fabrics in bright colors beneath warm hanging lights. A friendly employee approached me and asked if I needed assistance. Instead of panicking internally like before, I answered calmly and explained that I was searching for gifts for my family. She smiled warmly and began recommending popular items for tourists. While examining different scarves, I practiced more shopping vocabulary naturally. What colors do you have? Do you have another size? Is this cotton? Every question created another opportunity to strengthen my speaking confidence. Eventually, I selected several gifts and prepared to pay at the counter. Before handing over my card, I practiced another important shopping expression. Can I pay by card? The cashier nodded immediately and pointed toward the payment machine beside the register. Such a simple interaction might seem unimportant, but moments like these represented enormous personal growth for me. Only a short time earlier, even basic English conversations felt terrifying. Now I could participate in transactions, ask questions, understand answers, and respond naturally, without freezing from fear. As the afternoon continued, I sat briefly at a small cafe near the market entrance while organizing the souvenirs inside my backpack. Around me, travelers from different countries moved through the streets, carrying shopping bags and taking photographs beneath colorful signs. While sipping iced coffee, I reflected deeply on everything that had happened since the beginning of the journey. Airports, airplanes, hotels, museums, restaurants, markets, and conversations with strangers had all contributed to my language growth. None of those experiences felt like traditional classroom lessons, yet together they had transformed the way I understood English completely. Before traveling, I believed fluency meant speaking perfectly, without mistakes. However, the journey taught me something much more valuable. Communication depends more on courage, flexibility, listening, and human connection than flawless grammar alone. I had survived confusion, solved problems, made friends, ordered meals, navigated unfamiliar streets, and negotiated prices in another language. Of course, I still had much more to learn, but I was no longer afraid of speaking. That realization felt far more important than memorizing complicated vocabulary lists. As evening sunlight slowly faded across the busy shopping district, I stood near the center of the market holding bags filled with souvenirs for my family and friends back home. The streets around me glowed with warm lights while conversations echoed through the air in many different languages. For several quiet moments, I simply observed the world moving around me and realized how much I had changed during this trip. Earlier in my life, I would have avoided many of these interactions completely because of fear and self-doubt. Now I could ask questions confidently, negotiate politely, understand directions, and hold conversations with strangers from around the world. Smiling to myself, I adjusted my backpack and continued walking through the lively streets while recognizing clearly for the first time just how much my English communication skills had improved since the beginning of the journey. By the time the next morning arrived, I had already spent several unforgettable days exploring the city, practicing English, and discovering parts of myself that I had never fully understood before. My confidence had grown steadily through every conversation, every mistake, and every successful interaction with strangers. Although I still sometimes searched for vocabulary or misunderstood fast speech, fear no longer controlled me the way it once had. After breakfast, I noticed a brochure near the hotel reception advertising a guided city tour for international travelers. The tour included historical landmarks, local markets, river views, and cultural performances. More importantly, it offered another opportunity to practice speaking English naturally with people from different countries. Without hesitating too long, I signed up immediately and prepared for another full day of adventure. When I arrived at the meeting point outside the hotel district, several travelers were already waiting beside a small tour bus. Some stood alone checking their phones while others chatted casually in English. A tour guide wearing a bright blue jacket welcomed everyone warmly and began introducing himself through a microphone. As I listened carefully, I realized something surprising. Earlier in the trip, understanding a long English introduction would have felt extremely difficult. Now, although I still missed certain details occasionally, I could understand most of the main ideas comfortably. That realization filled me with quiet pride. While waiting for the tour to begin, I decided to challenge myself by starting conversations with other travelers instead of remaining silent. A young traveler standing nearby smiled politely in my direction, so I gathered my courage and introduced myself first. "Hi, nice to meet you," I said. "My name is Daniel." He smiled immediately and shook my hand. "Nice to meet you too," he replied warmly. Then came one of the most common travel questions in English, a sentence I had practiced countless times before leaving home. "Where are you from?" he asked. This time, unlike earlier conversations during the trip, my answer emerged naturally without nervous hesitation. "I'm from Vietnam," I answered confidently. Then I returned the same question. "Where are you from?" He explained that he came from Canada and was traveling through Asia for several months. As more travelers arrived, the group slowly became larger and more energetic. People introduced themselves, exchanged travel stories, and discussed places they hoped to visit during the tour. I noticed that many conversations followed similar patterns, which actually made communication easier. Travelers often asked simple questions such as, "Where are you from?" "How long are you staying?" "What do you do?" Because these expressions repeated frequently, I became more comfortable answering them naturally. Soon another traveler joined our conversation, and after introducing herself, she asked me, "What do you do?" Earlier in my life, even basic questions like this sometimes caused anxiety because I worried about grammar mistakes. Now I simply answered honestly and continued the conversation without overthinking every sentence. Once everyone boarded the tour bus, the guide began explaining the schedule for the day while the city moved past outside the windows. I sat beside several travelers I had just met, and throughout the ride we continued speaking casually in English about our interests, countries, hobbies, and favorite travel experiences. Sometimes someone shared photographs from previous trips while others recommended foods, museums, or hidden places worth exploring. What amazed me most was how natural these conversations now felt compared to my nervous practice sessions at home before the journey began. I no longer translated every sentence inside my head before speaking. Instead, I focused more on listening carefully and responding sincerely. Our first destination was a famous riverside district filled with old buildings, cafes, and local performers. The tour guide explained the history of the area, while groups of tourists walked slowly beside the water taking photographs. As we explored together, I continued practicing English naturally with the people around me. We discussed architecture, local culture, food recommendations, and funny travel experiences. Occasionally, I still made grammar mistakes or pronounced certain words imperfectly, but nobody seemed to care. Communication continued smoothly because everyone focused on understanding rather than perfection. That realization became one of the most important lessons of my entire journey. Later in the afternoon, the group stopped at a local street market where the guide encouraged everyone to explore freely for an hour. I walked through the colorful streets beside several new friends from the tour while we shared snacks and compared souvenirs. At one point, we stopped near a small food stall selling traditional desserts. One traveler asked the vendor questions in English about the ingredients, while another tried bargaining politely over prices. Listening to these interactions reminded me how much practical English surrounded everyday travel situations constantly. Language learning no longer felt separated from life. It existed inside movement, curiosity, humor, confusion, and connection. As the day continued, our group became increasingly comfortable together. We laughed easily, exchanged social media information, and took group photographs at famous landmarks across the city. During lunch at a riverside restaurant, the conversation became especially lively. People compared cultures, discussed dreams, and shared stories about challenges they had faced while traveling abroad. Listening to everyone speak openly inspired me deeply because I realized that many travelers experience similar fears and insecurities when communicating in another language. Confidence is not something people are born with naturally. It grows through action, mistakes, patience, and repeated experience. At one point during lunch, someone asked me how I had learned English. I paused for a moment before answering honestly. Mostly through practice, I explained. Before this trip, I was very nervous about speaking. Several people smiled knowingly because they understood exactly what I meant. Then I continued speaking more openly than expected. I explained how difficult English once felt inside classrooms, how afraid I was of making mistakes, and how traveling had slowly changed my mindset completely. Instead of laughing at my imperfections, everyone listened encouragingly. That supportive atmosphere made me realize something beautiful about communication. Language does not exist only for correctness. It exists to share experiences, emotions, and human connection. As evening approached, the tour bus returned slowly toward the city center while warm golden sunlight reflected across the river outside the windows. Many travelers looked tired, but happy after the long day of exploration. Some people slept quietly while others continued chatting softly about future travel plans. I sat near the window reflecting deeply on how much had changed since the beginning of the trip. At the airport, even ordering water on the airplane had felt intimidating. Now I had spent entire days speaking English naturally with international friends, guides, waiters, hotel staff, shopkeepers, and strangers from around the world. When the bus finally stopped near my hotel district, Everyone exchanged farewells reluctantly because the day together had created genuine friendships surprisingly quickly. We promised to stay connected online and perhaps meet again somewhere else in the world someday. As I walked slowly back toward the hotel beneath the glowing evening lights, a strange sadness appeared quietly inside me. My trip would end soon, and despite all the nervousness, confusion, and unexpected problems along the way, these days had become some of the most meaningful experiences of my life. I had discovered beautiful places, met incredible people, and transformed my relationship with English completely. Most importantly, I had learned that communication is not about perfection. It is about courage, openness, and connection. Thinking about all the memories already created during the journey, I suddenly realized with bittersweet emotion that I did not want the trip to end. My final morning in the city arrived much faster than I expected. When I opened the curtains inside my hotel room and looked down at the streets below, a deep mixture of gratitude, sadness, and pride filled my heart all at once. Only a short time earlier, this same city had looked overwhelming and intimidating from the hotel window on my first night abroad. Now the streets below felt strangely familiar, almost comforting. During the journey, I had learned how to navigate train stations, ask strangers for directions, order meals confidently, solve travel problems, and communicate naturally with people from many different countries. Most importantly, I had changed internally. The fear that once controlled me whenever I needed to speak English had slowly disappeared through real experience. I still made mistakes occasionally, but mistakes no longer felt dangerous or embarrassing. They simply felt like part of communication and growth. Before leaving the hotel, I packed my belongings carefully while reflecting on everything I had experienced during the trip. This time, unlike the nervous preparation before departure from home, I felt calm and organized. While placing souvenirs and clothes inside my suitcase, I quietly reviewed many of the useful English expressions that had guided me throughout the journey. At the airport, I had practiced sentences such as, "Where's gate 12? Can I see your passport?" And, "What time is boarding?" On the airplane, I learned practical expressions like, "Could I have some water?" and important vocabulary such as window seat and seatbelt. At the hotel, I had confidently said, "I have a reservation. Can I check in?" And, "What time is breakfast?" Each phrase now carried emotional memories connected to real experiences instead of abstract classroom exercises. After checking my room one final time, I took the elevator downstairs and approached the hotel reception desk. The receptionist recognized me immediately and smiled warmly. "Good morning. Are you checking out today?" she asked. Without hesitation, I answered confidently in English. "Yes, I'm checking out today." The conversation continued naturally while she printed my receipt and asked about my stay. I thanked her sincerely for the hotel's kindness and assistance, especially during the stressful situation with my missing luggage earlier in the trip. Thankfully, my suitcase had finally arrived safely 2 days after I reported it missing at the airport. Solving that problem independently had become one of the most important moments of personal growth during the entire journey. Before leaving the hotel, I stood quietly for a few moments near the lobby entrance while observing travelers arriving and departing around me. Some looked nervous and confused exactly the way I had felt during my first day abroad. Others moved confidently through the lobby, speaking English naturally with hotel staff. Watching them now, I realized something important. Confidence in communication rarely appears instantly. It develops gradually through repeated experience, small successes, and the willingness to continue speaking even after making mistakes. I smiled softly because I knew I was no longer the same fearful traveler who had entered the hotel several days earlier carrying only anxiety and uncertainty. Outside the hotel, The city glowed beautifully beneath the soft morning sunlight, while traffic moved steadily through the streets. I climbed into a taxi, heading toward the airport, and watched familiar buildings pass by through the window. During the ride, the driver asked simple questions about my trip, and we talked casually in English about food, sightseeing, and local culture. Earlier in the journey, maintaining spontaneous conversation like this would have exhausted me mentally because I translated every sentence carefully before speaking. Now, however, the interaction felt natural and enjoyable. I no longer focused constantly on avoiding mistakes. Instead, I focused on connection and understanding. When I arrived at the airport, I immediately noticed how different my emotions felt compared to my first day there. Earlier, the airport environment had seemed enormous, chaotic, and intimidating because English surrounded me everywhere. Now I understood airport signs, announcements, and procedures much more comfortably. I confidently found the check-in counter, handed over my passport, and answered the airline employee's questions smoothly. Did you pack your luggage yourself? Do you prefer a window seat or aisle seat? What time does boarding begin? These conversations no longer felt like difficult tests. They felt like normal communication. After check-in, I walked through passport control calmly while observing other travelers around me. The immigration officer asked several routine questions in English, and I answered without nervous hesitation. Once inside the departure area, I bought coffee from a small cafe and even helped another traveler understand directions to a nearby boarding gate. That moment surprised me deeply because only days earlier I had been the confused traveler asking strangers for help repeatedly. Now I could guide someone else using simple English instructions like go straight, turn left, and the gate is beside the bookstore. Realizing this made me smile proudly to myself. While waiting near the boarding gate, I reflected carefully on how every part of the trip had contributed to my language development. At restaurants, I practiced useful expressions such as, "Can I see the menu?" "I'd like fried rice." And "Could I get the bill?" During shopping trips, I learned how to ask, "How much is this?" "Do you have a cheaper one?" And "Can I pay by card?" While exploring the city, I became comfortable asking for directions and understanding transportation systems. Through guided tours and spontaneous conversations, I learned how to introduce myself naturally, ask, "Where are you from?" and discuss personal interests confidently. Each situation taught me practical communication skills connected directly to real life. Eventually, boarding began, and passengers slowly formed a line near the gate entrance. As I walked toward the airplane, I suddenly remembered my first international flight only days earlier. Back then, every English announcement and interaction had filled me with anxiety. Now I boarded the plane with calm confidence instead of fear. After finding my seat beside the window again, I fastened my seatbelt and looked outside at the runway while reflecting on the emotional transformation that had taken place during the journey. English no longer felt like a terrifying obstacle separating me from the world. Instead, it felt like a bridge that allowed me to connect with new people, solve problems, and experience life more fully. During the flight home, I spent much of the journey writing inside my notebook while clouds drifted endlessly beyond the airplane window. I recorded new vocabulary, useful expressions, personal memories, and important lessons learned throughout the trip. However, one thought appeared repeatedly across many pages. Real language learning begins when fear ends. For years, I believed I needed perfect grammar, perfect pronunciation, and perfect confidence before speaking English in real situations. Traveling taught me the opposite. Improvement happens through action, mistakes, repetition, listening, curiosity, and courage. Every conversation during the trip had strengthened not only my communication skills, but also my belief in myself. When the airplane finally landed back in my home country, I walked slowly through the airport carrying far more than souvenirs inside my luggage. I carried new confidence, unforgettable memories, international friendships, and a completely transformed relationship with English. Returning home felt comforting, yet part of me already missed the excitement of exploring unfamiliar streets and speaking with strangers from around the world. As I stepped outside the airport and breathed the familiar air of home again, I realized something important with complete clarity. English was no longer something to fear. It had become a tool that opened doors to experience, growth, friendship, and adventure. Smiling quietly to myself, I promised that I would continue studying and practicing English every single day because somewhere beyond the horizon, another journey was already waiting for me. If you have stayed with me until this final moment of the journey, I truly hope you can feel how much courage can grow through small daily steps. At the beginning of the trip, I was afraid of simple English conversations, afraid of making mistakes, and afraid that people would not understand me. But little by little, through airports, hotels, restaurants, shopping streets, and conversations with strangers, I discovered something life-changing. English is not about perfection. It is about connection, experience, and the courage to keep speaking even when your voice shakes. Every mistake became a lesson, every conversation became memory, and every new place became proof that learning a language can completely change the way we see the world and ourselves. If my journey has inspired you even a little, I hope you will continue learning English every day with me, because your own adventure may begin sooner than you think. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next English lesson, travel story, and real-life speaking experience. Thank you for traveling with me, and I cannot wait to see you again in the next journey.